Happy New Year. My mom was complaining because it doesn't feel like winter in New Hampshire. I was like, careful what you ask for, right? So thank you for braving the cold, coming on down. It's good to see you all. We only have one real announcement this morning, and that's we are switching over to a new sort of church management system. Before we had like 5 different ways to take payments and register people and all of that. We're moving away from that. 1, because it's expensive. 2, because it's complicated. And 3, because we found this service called Breeze that you'll be getting an email about, maybe multiple emails from the office, sort of updating like how we manage our membership. And it's a great service because it allows you to sort of plug in all of your, like how you want to do your pledge and things like that. But it also lets you update your photos so that we'll sort of have like a membership book, right? Where you can be like, oh, that's who Nikki is. I've heard about her. Now I know her face from here, as David said in the first service, like from here up. No, take your photo, please, without your mask. But it's much cheaper, much easier. However, the thing about it is it's really driven by you. So we're going to send you a link to your profile, and we're going to be asking you to update it and keep that fresh, and you'll be able to log in and do it very easily. But it will really sort of streamline so much of the back end for us. So we're unrolling that this month. Is that how you say it? Unrolling that? Is that one of those words where you're like, is that what that means? Anyways, rolling it out. We're rolling it out. I knew there was something like weird about that. We're rolling it out this month. And we have really high hopes. It's been, a lot of churches are adopting it. So we're excited. I'm getting laughs already just on the announcements. So, all right. Before I lose my gift, let's begin the service with these words from Reverend Charles F. Flagg. Every endeavor begins with a first step and encounters difficulty along the way. We know the difficulty of ignorance, of fear, and of tyranny. But we also know the dawning of the light, the beginnings of hope, and the renewal of life. Blessed be the eternal power that inspires us to kindle this light. Blessed be the source of light and of life.
In January 2006, my parents, long divorced and living in different states, died just 5 days apart. At work, the department I'd led was eliminated, and I was offered a lower-level, part-time position. My ego was bruised. My bearings were lost. I was adrift. I went through the motions of my daily routines in a fog, moving from grief to numbness and back again. Things needed doing. There were calls to make, estates to settle, a part-time job to maintain. The family had to eat. I did these things in slow motion, putting one foot in front of the other, despite the hollowness, the broken heart, the seeming futility of it all. We've all been in that place after a loss, a diagnosis, a defeat. What keeps us moving forward through the darkness? During that awful time, hope was like an unseen conveyor belt, moving me forward, propelled by life's daily obligations. While steeped in grief, I passively participated in life, doing only the bare minimum to get by. That winter, I met with a minister to plan my mother's memorial service. Reverend Lucinda Duncan, a stranger to me, offered me hope when my tank was empty. In discussing how to celebrate my mother's life, she helped me see beyond my immediate grief to the role I could play in holding Mom's memory and carrying forward her legacy. I saw that I could best honor her life by living mine more fully, more authentically, more courageously. That talk with Reverend Duncan offered a crack of light through which I could begin to see new possibilities. With hope just barely awakened, I took a leap of faith. Jim, who was ready for a change, and I quickly decided to move our family to Utah to live closer to my brother and his young family. We sold our house in Maryland and bought one in Salt Lake. I took my job west and began to telework, and we trusted Jim would find work on arrival. And here, that crack of light widened into a new life, better than anything we had before, and far better than anything we had imagined. That was a personal journey from grief to hope. The process repeats itself when I get discouraged about the state of our democracy, our climate, the world my kids will inherit. When I lose hope about the future, I look to my kids and others in their generation, and I let their energy, their idealism, their hope for the future carry me until my own hope returns. Is this how Gandhi, Viktor Frankl, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Nelson Mandela not only endured, kept alive their hope for a better, more just world? How does hope persevere through what seem to be impossible odds? And what can we do when hope flags? Emily Dickinson's poem offers some perspective. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Hope is not the exclusive purview of saints and movement leaders. Perhaps, as Emily Dickinson wrote, it perches in the soul and never stops at all. Like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, or like me after my parents died, hope is there all along, even when it can't be felt. Yet it so often takes another person to awaken that hope within us. Our interconnectedness and the daily obligations of our service to others is the conveyor belt that keeps us moving through the worst of times. I sometimes think those service obligations, in whatever form, whether it's minding children, serving coffee, or serving at the welcome table at church, maintaining the garden, or keeping the books for a nonprofit, these are insurance against the most acute heartbreaks which make hope so inaccessible. I believe, like Reverend Duncan did, and like my kids unknowingly do for me, that others can hold and carry hope for us when we're down, and give it back when we're healed and ready to carry it again. And likewise, we can do this for each other. This is our spiritual work, what it means to care, to love thy neighbor, to be part of a community. We can hold hope for others by sharing our own stories of our reemergence from hopelessness. And when we ourselves feel hopeless, we can lean on others. That little bird, though nearly weightless, may sometimes be too much to bear, and then we can let others carry it, knowing that regardless of who holds it, hope, that little bird abashed by neither gale nor storm, never stops at all.
Now is the time that we accept the offertory. And in the sermon today, we're talking a little bit about the interim process, a little bit about what the purpose is of church. And just sort of as a little preview, there are people out here who are waiting for our message, right? They're waiting for a larger sense of community and belonging, who are looking for a place that they can come because they don't know how to make meaning of their lives right now. And that's what we do. You know, more than anything else, we are the place that holds space for you to explore how we are going to be part of this transforming world. And we've been, many of you, for a long time, and so you're holding and mentoring and learning still yourself, but many of you now mentoring newer people. And this is really the most important thing that we can do with our lives. Right? Hold space for those who are seeking a community that helps them be a part of the transforming world. And so I really appreciate everything that you do, sort of helping to run this place, but also to fund it, to keep it open for the people who are seeking it. Thank you so much for your generous donations. haven't sung that Doxology in so many years, but at my very first church, they sang that Doxology, but it was a negotiated space because half the congregation wanted Spirit of Life, and the other half wanted For All That Dwells. So we did it like every other week, and so singing it now, it just really brings me back to like learning what it meant to be a minister and negotiating the different desires and needs of the members. It's a great memory. And over the course of our time together here, so I'm here for 2 years, for those of you who are new, you'll hear me preach some sermons that are focused more on the traditional dimensions of spiritual discernment and development. And there are others that are written with the interim process more specifically in mind. And thinking about the new year, I just thought we would start with a conversation that included that perspective. You'll never hear a sermon that is solely about the interim process because that's really quite boring, technical, and not very spiritual. It's really important, but that's not really what the Sunday worship is about or should be about. Still, there are times when it's important to acknowledge that you are going through a very special process called interim ministry. It's a very special process. And sometimes there's some confusion around the purpose of interim ministry or the interim time. And the process defaults to being guided by the question, what qualities do we want to see in the next minister? But this is not the right question to ask. A much better question is, who do we want to be as a church in 2, 5, 10 years? Right? How do we want to be transforming the world? And if you can develop a vision that seeks to answer this question, then the right minister to guide that process will appear. You'll know who you are, and they'll be able to see it. You'll be able to select well, right? Rather than try to find the right minister, right? So who do you want to be as a spiritual organization? Because we are responsible for our own worship experiences. And we are also responsible for the worship experiences for the people sitting next to us in the pews. Because worship is communal. It's a communal experience. Thankfully, there are many ways to create worship communities. The only real requirement is for a longing to be spiritually engaged with the world around us. Now, you've heard me speak repeatedly about ecological collapse that we're experiencing, the war, homelessness, the loneliness and isolation that so many of us are feeling in this modern industrial society. You've heard me also speak about my belief that the only real solution to these problems lies in the spiritual encounter. That is, we're not going to think our way out of these problems. We're going to have a transformation that happens to us that is like precognitive, right? That defines our relationship to the people and the world around us. I believe it is possible to imagine a different future, one that is based on empathy and interconnection, one that is based on recognition and interdependence. And what I'm really talking about is a new fertility, a new fecundity that is within our lived experience. I believe this fertility becomes available to us through the spiritual encounter, however that looks for you. The most fertile place is your mind. The most fertile place is your mind. And I don't mean this figuratively, right? Like some sort of hyperbolic axiom, the richness lives within you, right? I mean it quite literally. Literally. There is a fertility within you that is waiting to be cultivated and developed. Spiritual, emotional fertility. And it's actually being developed as we speak, as we engage with one another. And it's really a question of how do we aid this development, this cultivation, this nurturance in a way that can help change our future. The wonderful and helpful thing is that we can actually locate this fertile space. It is in your prefrontal cortex. Truly. And until recently, we thought the brain had a finite number of cells, and when they died, they died. But that turns out not to be true. Over the last few decades, we've come to learn that our brains have the capacity to rewire. This is neuroplasticity. Right? That new neural pathways can be created. And it is our experiences, how we behave, how we engage, how we interact with the world, that determines the focus and the significance of how these new neural pathways are created. Are they created guided by fear? Are they created guided by love? Because they're being created. So if you'll do a little experiment with me, I would love you to raise your arm, just holding the palm open, right? And imagine that your arm is the spine, and the palm of your hand is the brainstem. Now this is sort of the very primitive portion of the brain, the oldest part, right? It regulates our body. As Nikki pointed out earlier, it's connected to all of our organs, right? So everything that runs down, it just runs right through the body. It's responsible for a very primal sense of protection. Our fight or flight or freeze function comes out of this portion of the brain. Now, if you fold your thumb in and then wrap your remaining fingers around it, the thumb is what is called the limbic system. Some of you have probably heard of this. And it generates our emotions, and it helps us feel our feelings and understand our relationships. There's a lot of impulses, innate behaviors, instincts that come from these two first areas. It is an emotional state that is regulated by what we feel in the body. Now, the fingers wrapped around the thumb represent the mammalian development called the cortex. And from the top knuckle to the second knuckle, right, this is called the frontal cortex. And we got this when we became primates. And the section from the second knuckle to the fingertips, the part that's way out in front, is called the prefrontal cortex. And this is the area that's most developed in humans. It is the part of the brain that allows us to pause before acting on impulse. The prefrontal region actually calms down the lower regions. So as humans, we have the power to regulate what happens in this emotional state. We become less impulsive, less aggressive, more open to possibility, more open to chaos. This is where compassion comes from. This is where empathy and connection live with us. Right? This little section. And we can develop that portion of the brain through practice. You actually can cultivate that part. So what that means is we can intentionally engage in our own evolution by growing new neural pathways and increasing our ability to understand our interconnection with other beings. It may be the most fertile place in the entire world. because its cultivation, its augmentation, its development will literally change every other environment because it changes our relationship to one another, our relationship to the environment, and since there is no place on the planet that humans either don't influence or outright dominate, it changes everything. This little portion. Which makes us incredibly responsible for its cultivation. Right? We are in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event on the planet. And the one thing that differentiates this extinction event from the previous ones is that humans are the primary cause. They call this the Holocene, right? That humans are doing it. Now, I don't say this as a form of judgment, but rather as a statement on the evolution of life on this planet and the curious development of the prefrontal cortex that for the first time in the history of life on the planet, a species is able to understand that it comes from and belongs to all other beings. We grew out of this planet. We grew out of it just like the grass and the trees and the other animals. We understand that we all have the same source, that we're a part of it, even if we don't actually behave that way right now. We know it. We don't behave there, but we know it. But there is a fertility that exists in this portion of our brain that says it is possible. It is possible for us to unify our understanding of our origins and our behaviors towards the biosphere. If you have hope. What's so intriguing for a lot of researchers is that the development of the prefrontal cortex happens through a practice that we call meditation or prayer. There's a burgeoning field of study that explores mindfulness practice as well as a person's relationship to God, however you define that, right? However you understand that concept. That the mind is a process that regulates the flow of energy and is both embodied and relational. And it's an energy system that can be developed when we engage in contemplative practices, which, you don't have to go on retreats. Sometimes you can just sit and breathe. Cultivating neural pathway. It's not always as easy as it sounds, right? Someone told me it's like sometimes it's very hard to sit and be mindful, right? Because you're confronted by a lot. Truly. If you're in my brain, you're confronted by a lot. And yet, what is our responsibility for thinking about how we want to engage in the new sense of belonging? How do we cultivate our brain? How do we participate in our own evolution? Spirituality, however that works for you, actually grows the most complex parts of our brains. Now, this can be somewhat awkward, maybe even confronting for those of us who have had it, up to here with religion. Right? Those of us fortunate enough to live in a nation without a national religion or a police force or militia that enforce that religion. It's kind of a curious place to stand. We've fought very hard. We've struggled to free ourselves from manipulative and coercive elements of religion that seem to be more about controlling us than actually helping us live in relationship with one another. It's a real shadow side of religion. But perhaps this too has been part of the process. We know that consciousness has evolved. Today, those of us in this room, physically, in an embodied way, do not think the same way as someone from the medieval era. We just think differently. And a person from the medieval era did not think the same way as a hunter-gatherer. Our minds have expanded through time. Sometimes it almost as if we talk about humans as a snapshot, human beings as a snapshot, like we think the same as people did 250,000 years ago, but we do not. Our minds have expanded and grown and evolved. And we are in that process now. So what we're working on is creating a greater sense of union and bond and connection. Now, Jeremy Rifkin points out that we used to identify, tribally, those who live beyond the mountain range or the river, right? Those up in Park City. Looking at you guys. They're outside the tribe, right? They're not in our family. Oh, wait, they sometimes are in the town. You're confusing because you go back and forth. Right? But then we expanded our consciousness beyond just a region to define what was family. We created religion, right? And Jews recognize Jews as members of the same family. Christians recognize Christians as the same family. Didn't matter which region you were in, right? Oh, we're the same family, so on. Then we developed a nation state. Right? Germans recognized everyone living within a certain area as German. Canadians recognized everyone living within a certain area as Canadian. Didn't matter what religion you were. It could be all of them. You were still German. You're still Canadian. Now, the truth is we know all of these are fictions, right? There is no nation state, just like there wasn't one before we decided was. Siam is no longer with us, right? But it was once, and, it's not now. Babylonia is not here anymore. And just as there actually is no Jewish family or Christian family, not really. We just agree that there is based on a certain set of parameters. But we all walked out of Africa at some point, and none of that existed then. Right? We agree to it because it allows a greater sense of inclusion. Often we speak of it as creating exclusion, but the agreement we've made is one that allowed for greater inclusion. So how do we allow for an even greater sense of inclusion? How do we use our prefrontal cortex? How do we grow it in such a way that creates even more opportunity for belonging? For all of the complaints that people make about social media, and I think there are many reasons to complain, I also believe that things like Facebook and Twitter were born out of a desire for a greater sense of connection. And personally, I feel this, right? I use an example of Syria here, but I can tell you the moment when it really hit me. It happened during the Arab Spring, and I saw a photo of these Egyptian Christians who were all holding hands in a circle around Egyptian Muslims who were praying. And the Christians were holding the circle to keep the Muslims safe from the forces of the state. And I remember seeing that photo and being like, I don't know if I've met an Egyptian. I think I must have. Or actually, I do know one that I've met, right? But I don't really know Egyptians, but I felt aligned with them. I felt like I belonged with them. And that came from a photo I saw on Facebook. Right? And at that moment, I was like, oh, for all the evils that this thing is, it actually is making me feel connected to people I've never met. And that's something, that has a shift in our culture that has created a greater sense of inclusion. Like, I worry about people in another part of the world that I've never met, probably never will meet. I don't want them to suffer. I want them to be free. I see myself as aligned with them. And this hasn't always been the case, right? Not very long ago, very recently, in fact, Jessica and I would not have been able to worship together, let alone lead worship together. Right? I am a man, she is a woman, and worshiping together was not allowed. In many places, it is still not allowed. But increasingly, it is allowed because we, in our brains, are creating the opportunity for greater inclusion through an understanding of who we are. What we have learned about the prefrontal cortex is contrary to that trite line, survival of the fittest, which is not what we thought it meant. It's not. We are not wired for aggression. We are not wired for violence and self-interest, not humans anyway. Survival of the fittest, in our sense, is that we are wired for sociability, attachment, affection, companionship. Our survival, and those who do best in our societies, are people who can relate, who can bond well, who can show affection and receive affection well. Our primary drive is to belong. That's how our brains are wired. And the question for us as spiritual seekers is, to what do we wish to belong? A greater humanity where there is no Ukraine, no Russia, no US, no China? Perhaps a greater sense of relationship with the animals on the planet. We are all related after all. Maybe our sense of belonging is to the biosphere, our great ancestral mother. The possibilities of our belonging are bound only by the limitations of our imagination. So what can we imagine? What could we belong to? And the development of our prefrontal cortex through prayer and meditation is the path that helps us create that greater sense of belonging. In the Ayurvedic tradition, they say new neural pathways are formed in experiences like getting pregnant, falling in love. But it doesn't just have to be with another person, right? This new neural pathway can be created when you fall in love with God, whatever that means, right? That doesn't have to be the one of your youth. It can be, you can have a new one, right? And I believe that we are here to grow your prefrontal cortex so that you have a greater capacity to love, and therefore a greater capacity to belong, and allow others to belong to you. And it ripples like a stone, tossed into a tranquil pond. Others will transform because of your transformation. We are not going to think our way out of the problems we are facing in the world. We actually already have all of the solutions. There's nothing to be thought. It's actually just letting go of the barrier that tells us we're separate. And that's a spiritual experience. So instead, we seek to cultivate the spiritual experience that grows our brain to allow us to embody a sense of belonging to others. Coming back to the beginning. The interim period, therefore, is about exploring how you plan to offer a spiritual path of greater inclusion for the people who want to attend this community because our purpose is to transform lives. It's not to be a sanctuary from the other churches out there, right? It is to transform the planet. Now, different ministers have different skills, so it's important to know where you're going when you are going to pick a minister, right? Don't choose minister X if you're going in direction Y. But what the minister says is not as important as how you cultivate transformation with each other. How you create more God amongst yourselves. How you create more God in the lives of other people. That sense of connection and belonging, inclusion. Not to convert them to a particular way of thinking, it's not about dogma, but to invite them into a greater sense of companionship and connection, a greater sense of being. It is in the fertility of your minds that you will make this happen. And prayer and meditation that enriches this fertile area. It is what determines how we cultivate new neural pathways based either on fear or based on love. Falling in love with God, whatever that looks like, literally changes your brain. And changing your brain changes humanity. And a change in humanity changes the planet. The possibilities are bound only by what we can imagine. So may we free our minds from what we think we should allow and give them the room to imagine what might be. Amen.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. To be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be
Got religion up in here. Somebody tell me it's a Unitarian church. I'm just kidding. Source of life. God, my darling. Let us leave this warm room, this warm community. Go back out into that frozen tundra knowing that there are people who need the warmth that we have. Inspire us to share it with them simply by looking in their eyes and witnessing the worth and dignity that is just inherent as beings. Awaken us to the great interwovenness of creation, the space beyond life, beyond birth and death, beyond all divisions, beyond all names that we create. Awaken us to our true name, which has no name. The presence of Source. And fill us with grace, so we might step over those little walls that we've created and that other people have created and put in our brains that say that I am in this group and you are in that group, so that we might be the heralds of a new inclusion, a new belonging, a new creation. Amen.